And okay, let us begin. Okay. Okay. Hi. We're beginning Daf Yutes Omer Sheni, about 12 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yeshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, said, we learned before that, we learned in our Mishnah that 3 days before Yom Tiv, you have to keep 3 days of Avelos before Yom Tiv, and only then, when Yom Tiv comes, your Shiva is interrupted and gone forever. Then we also learned that there's a machlokes between Chachamim and Abba Shaul, whether you say Miktzas Hayom Kekulai. What does that mean? That means that at the end of Shiva, according to Abba Shaul, is as soon as you keep the last day a little bit, Miktzas Hayom, part of the day, is as if you kept the whole day and your Shiva is over. According to Chachamim, you have to keep complete 7 days of Avelis. So Amar Rav Huna b'Reid Rav Yeshua, Hakoil Moedim, even Rav Shaul would agree. When the seventh day comes out, third day comes out an erev regel. That means this is the 3 days you have prior to Yom Tiv. She'asa berchitza ad ha'erev. You're not allowed to take a bath until the night. In other words, Avelis, you don't say Miktzas Hayom Kekulai, and you can take a bath before Yom Tiv. No, you have to have 3 complete days, even according to Abba Shaul. Omram Nechemim Rav Yeshua Ashkechintu L'Rapapi L'Rapapa Diasvik Amri Halacha Kiruv Huna Rav Yeshua. The halacha follows what Rav Huna Rav Yeshua said. Ikadamri, another version of the same thing. It means everybody said it at once. Omram Nechemia B'Reid Rav Yosef. Rav Nechemia, son of Rav Yosef, said Ashkechintu L'Rapapi L'Rapapa L'Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yeshua Diasvik Amri. I found them, Rapapi and Rapapa and Rav Huna B'Reid Yeshua. All 3 of them were sitting and saying, same idea. Hakol Moedim. Even Abba Shaul, who always holds Miktzas Yom Kekulai, Shimchal Shlishi Shaloi Liyos Erev HaRegel, if the 3rd day comes out on Erev Yom Tiv, she'also berchitza ad ha'erev. It's also to wash, it's also to take a bath until the nighttime. So now the Gemara asks a question, a shayla and halacha. Boy minei Abaya mirabba. Abaya asked the question from Rabba. Kavari beregel. Somebody died on Yom Tiv. Let's say the first day of Yom Tov, somebody dies. Regel oila loila minyan shloishim, oy ein regel oila loila minyan shloishim. Can you count the 30 days from the time the person died? And therefore, although the person's not going to start sitting Shiva till after Yom Tov, but maybe you can count the shloishim from the day the person was buried, which is the first day of Yom Tov. So you're basically counting shloishim prior to doing the Shiva. So leminyan Shiva like Mabayale. Certainly Shiva, you can't count Regel to be Shiva because Shiva will start after Yom Tiv. My question is, Leminyan Shloishim, the Kanahagas Mitzvah Shloishim Beregel, because you already accustoming yourself to Mitzvah Shloishim. What's unique about Shloishim is you can't take a haircut, right? So this person is not taking a haircut during Yom Tiv. So it's like maybe he's doing it for Yom Tiv reasons, but maybe it could also be counted for the days of Shloishim. So Shloishim will start from the day that you buried the person. What's the din? So this rabbi answered, it's not counted. That means you first have to have a Shiva. When you start counting Shiva, which is after Yom Tiv, that's when you will start counting the Shloishim. Eisvei, we asked the question. The Brisa says, let's say you only have 2 days before Yom Tiv and you buried your dead. So then Yom Tiv does not abolish the Shiva because you only kept 2 days of Avelis before Yom Tiv. Then you count 5 days after Yom Tiv. Right? Because your in Shiva basically was interrupted. So you'll do 2 before Yom Tiv, 5 after Yom Tiv, total 7. Then the Brisa says, al yedei acherim, and your work after those 5 days that you're going to be noig after a regel is really a lighter version of Shiva. Why? Because you really had people visiting you throughout Yom Tiv, like being Menachem Avel you. So those 5 days after Yom Tiv is the lightest version of Shiva you can have. Therefore, you can have work done perform for you, even if it's not a davar of it, through other people doing it for you. Even though when you're an aval, you can't have work done for you, this time you're allowed to. You can have servants and maids doing private work in your house. And so, which cannot be done if you are regular sitting the first time, if you're an aval during the shiva. But this is a lighter version of shiva. The Ein Rabbim is asking you, and that's what I said. Nobody comes to visit you, Menachem Aval. Why? Shekavar, we begin Chaf Amar Aleph, Shekavar Nisasku by Beregel. That people came to visit you on Yontiv. So therefore, no one has to really come during that 5 days of Shiva that you're going to be Noyeg after Yontiv. Kolol Shadav, I'll give you the set rule. Kol Shum Evel, anything that has to do with Avelus, Regel Mafsika, Regel, the Yontiv will interrupt it, and therefore you'll have to continue it after Yontiv. The Chol Shehu Mishum Iske Rabim, anything that has to do with visiting Menachem Aval, Ein Regel Mafsika, Regel doesn't interrupt it. So people come to this person and Menachem Aval on Yontiv himself. So the guy was noyeg 2 days of Shiva before Yontiv. Then during Yontiv, people are coming and Menachem Aval. After Yontiv, he keeps 5 days of Avelus of Shiva, but nobody comes to visit him because the Regel didn't interrupt that. Now, the Brisa says, and here we're getting to the question. Let's say a guy died on the end of Yontiv, 3 days before the end of Yontiv. So then Shiva doesn't start on Yontiv. So Manu Shiva Achar Regel, you count 7 after the Regel. So Abba Yom Rishonim, the first 4 days, Rabbim is asking boy. Then you have Menachem Aval. So only 4 days people Menachem Aval. Why? Because the first 3 days, even though it was Yontiv, people were coming to Menachem Aval. So those first 4 days of Shiva happen to be where people will visit him. Shloisha Yomim Achrayim, but the last 3 days, Ein Rabbim must ask him, boy, people don't visit him, Shekvanis ask Beregel, because they already visited him on Yontiv. So that's why it's not. That's why the 3 days are the extra 3 days are a lighter type of Avelus. Now here comes the question. The guy died in middle of Yontiv. The regel oilaloi. The Brisa says the regel is counted as the shloishim. That's what oilaloi means. The regel is you start counting shloishim from the time the person died. So this is a question against Rabbah. Rabbah said that if a person dies on Yontiv, you don't count shloishim until you start counting Shiva. Ma'alav asefa. Isn't this regel oilaloi, this part that says it's counted for the shloishim is going on the last case where the guy died in Yontiv, and says the Gemara, no, not so Aresha. It's going on the first part of the Brisa, which, if you recall, the first part of the Brisa was a guy died 2 days before Yontiv. So that's when you can count Shloishim because you already counted, you started your Shiva. But in the second part, you count Shloishim will not start until after Yontiv when you start your Shiva. One more question. Esvei, this is the knockout blow. Esvei, Regel Oileloi Leminyan Shloishim. From on Yontiv, you count the Shloishim, even if the guy died on Yontiv. Ketzad, Kavore, you buried him Betchilas Regel. The first day of Yontiv, a guy died, a relative died, and you buried him. Your Shiva is not starting now. Your Shiva, minor Shiva Achar Regel. You count the Shiva after the Yontiv. Umalachtoy Nasis al Yedei Acherim. But during those Shiva, after Yontiv, is a light Shiva. Why? Because people were already coming to visit you on Yontiv, because the Nifter was Nifter the first day of Yontiv, so everybody was Nachan Oval over Yontiv. So you do count Shiva after the Regel, but it's a lighter form of Shiva. Therefore, you can have work done by other people. They can do quiet work in your house. The Ein Rabbim is asking boy. People don't come to visit you. Shekvanis asku by Beregel. People came to Menachem Aval in Yontiv itself. So you have a Shiva, a private Shiva. And therefore, the Regel Oiloi. And the here clearly says that you start counting Shloishim from the time the guy died, which is in the beginning of Yontiv. To Yofta, this is a refutation against Rabbah. That's that when somebody dies on Yontiv, you start counting the Shloishim right then and there. Ki also Ravin, when Ravin came back from to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, his teacher in Eretz Yisrael, afilu kvar beregel. Even if a person died on Yontif, you count Shloshim from that moment. Rabbi Elazar instructed Rapadas, his son. Apparently, Rapadas, his son, was sitting Shiva, and he wasn't sitting Shiva. He lost somebody on Yontif. Afilu kvar beregel. Even if you buried him on Yontif, the Shloshim starts from that moment. Now, Tanurabanim, and here we're going to come up to the more familiar opinion of what happens. Somebody dies before Yontif. So first, the Brisa says what our Mishnah said. Kiem kviyas amita shloishes yamin kaidel regel. Basically, you sat Shiva for 3 days before Yontif. So then regel interrupts your Shiva. You don't have to have any turning over the beds. Turning over the beds is like you started noyeg Avelus 3 days before Yontif. You don't have to do it after Yontif because why? Simple. You have most of the most intense form of crying before Yontif. Then Yontif will interrupt the Shiva, and that's it. Divrei Rabbi Elazar. The Chachamim, that's the most familiar opinion. Even afili yom echad, even if it's 1 day before Yontif, you had a Shiva. If someone died an hour before Yontif, they bury that person right then and there, and they try to get the Avelim to sit Shiva at least for 5-10 minutes, and that's it. And then Yontif comes, and you don't have to sit Shiva anymore. And that's what the more familiar opinion is. Amar Rab Elazar Rab Shimon, hein divrei Beis Shammai, hein divrei Beis Hillel. These are that is the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. They had a tradition that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel had the same argument between like Rabbi Elazar and Chachamim had. In order for regel to interrupt and stop, I should say stop, Shiva, you have to have 3 days before Yontif of sitting Shiva. Even if you sat for 1 day, even 1 hour, we learned, you're already, regel stops your Shiva. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Rab Yochanan, va'amri lo, and others say Rab Yochanan, Rab Chia bar Abba, Rav Huna. That Rab Yochanan said to Rab Chia bar Abba, Rav Huna, even if you had 1 day, even 1 hour, regel stops the sitting of Shiva. Rava Amma, but Rava is more strict. Halacha kitani didam. The halacha is like our Tana. The only time regel will stop a Shiva is the Amma Shloisha, if you have 3 days before. Gemara continues. Ravina ikla l'sura de pras. Ravina was in the city called Sura de Pras. Amal Ravchina l'Ravina. Rav Chiviva said to Ravina, Hilka Samai. Ravina was a guest there, and Rav Chiviva took advantage and asked Ravina the question: who is the halacha regarding how much time before Yontif will Yontif stop the Shiva? Amalei. So Ravina responded, Ravina is like the last of the Amoraim. And that's how we paskin. Afilu yom echad, afilu sho'a achas. If you have 1 hour before Yontif, that's it. You don't have to keep Avelus anymore. The Gemara continues. Yosef Rab Chia bar Abba, Rab Ami, Rab Yitzchak Napacha. Rab Chia bar Abba, Rab Ami, and Rab Yitzchak Napacha. They were sitting Akilad Rab Yitzchak ben Elazar on the porch of Rab Yitzchak ben Elazar. Why were they sitting on his porch? It's not clear, but they had a conversation. Nafek Milsa mi benayu. They decided they were discussing a halacha amongst them, a source. Now we had a source yesterday. From where do you know that there's a concept of shloishim, that you're not allowed to take a haircut for 30 days? So we had a gzeira shava of para from Nazir. Now the question is, minayin la'avelus shiva. How do you know that you have to have oval for 7 days? So the ksiv, it says in the pasuk, v'afachti chagechem le'evel. I'm going to turn your yomtivs to Avel, right? To Avelus. The Navi was saying, your yomtivs will turn into a mourning. So there's a juxtaposition between Chag and Avelus. Ma Chag Shiva, Af Avelus Shiva. Just like Yontiv is 7, so also Avelus is Shiva. Now, yeah. So we also find the Taisus points out a good question. We also find that we have a pasuk in Navi that teaches you Avelus is 7 days. But if you think about it, if you know Chumash, you remember that when Yaakov died, the pasuk says in the end of Parashat Vayechi, Vayas la'avav Evel shivas yamim. they made an Avelis for Yaakov for 7 days. So why don't we bring that source of the Chumash as a great source that Avelis is for 7 days? So Taisa says, one, that Avelis was actually before they buried him. They buried him in that Avelis was in Mitzrayim, and then they took him to the Maras HaMachpelah. So that's not a good proof. And then Taisa says anything that's written before Matan Torah that we don't learn from halachas from them. That this Navi was written after Matan Torah, so that's a better source of Avelis of 7. I'm just throwing it out there. If anybody can tell me who was the first one to have Avelis in the Torah? If you know,
it's not Beferish, but it was Yitzchak was sitting Shiva for Avram.
There's something even before that.
Even before that,
Misushalach.
Zayin, yeah.
Yep.
For the Mabel.
Yep, that's right. So just throwing it out there. So it's a Misushalach was able of 7 days. The Ema, so the Gemara says, okay, 7 days, but because you have a juxtaposition of Chag to Avelus, so that's how you know it's a Shiva, it's a 7-day Avelus. But Chag could also be Shavuos, and Shavuos is 1 day. So the Gemara's question is, Ve'emat Saras the Chag Yomim. Maybe Avelus should be 1 day because Shavuos is one of the Yom Tovim that has a 1 day celebration. So the answer is yes. Avelus could be sometimes 7 days and sometimes 1 day. We're going to learn about this later on today, but the Shmura Chayki is that if it's 30 days past that somebody died, and you find out about it that you're supposed to sit Shiva, that Shiva, you don't sit Shiva. That the Shiva only lasts for 1 day because the Ksiv afachtem chagechem le'evel. So we see so we see that since the Shavuos is a 1 day yontiv, there's a possibility for Avelus to be a 1 day thing. How is that? If it's a Shmura Chayke, if the person died 30 days and you didn't hear about it, if by the 31st day you hear about it, you sit only 1 day of Shiva. I had this with my grandmother. Was very old. When she was older, her sister died, and a cousin from Switzerland wrote her, she spoke German and writes, I was there when she read that letter, and it was the 29th day. And she wrote, oh, I'm so sorry that you lost your sister. I wanted to write this letter. And she writes in beautiful German. So now my grandmother, who didn't know that her sister died, just found out on the 29th day that her sister died, and she had to sit Shiva. But anyway, there's no inyan that to tell somebody, there's no mitzvah to tell somebody, especially for an older person, that somebody died. You probably better off that it becomes a shmura chayke, so they'll have an easier time during Avelus. It's not that they have a chi of Avelus. It's just when they hear about it, that's when they have the Avelus. Taner Rabbanan. Now we got into that discussion. Shmura kroiva neheges shiva ushloishim. Shmura chayke ein neheges al yomecha. If it's a recent event, you have to have shiva and shloishim. If it's a non-recent event, it's a 1 day thing. Ezi kroiva ve'ezi rechayka. Kroiva is b'soich shloishim. If it's within the 30 days of the event of the death, then you have to have shiva and shloishim. Rechayka, if it's distant, la'acha shloishim. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. That's what we paskin like. Chachamim said, Chachamim very strict. No matter what, Avelus always going to be 7 and 30. And not only that, wherever you have a yochid that's lenient and the rabbim go strict, and no matter what, you always go after the rabbim. Halacha k'rabbim, we go after the majority. So technically, you should paskin like the Chachamim. Chutz mizu in this case, Sha'afa bishab Kiva make of a chachama machmirin hachalocha k'Rabbi Akiva the halachas k'Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Shmuel, we had this before. Halacha k'divrei hamekel ba'avo. We always go. Shmuel says we always go lenient in avelus. Therefore, if we find an opinion that shmura chayka, a non-recent event, you sit shiva for 1 day, and that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, we follow that opinion. Rabbi Chanina, the Gemara says over here, two stories. Rabbi Chanina asile shmua davua mi beichazoi. For some reason, he heard about his father passing on in Beichazoi, and it was a shmua. So it was also the common Chizda. He didn't know how many days should he sit. There was a shmua rechoika. Rav Chizda told Rabbi Chanina, shmua rechoika einon hegas el yom echad. Shmua rechoika, you only have to sit one day shiva for your father. Rab Nasim bar Ami asile shmua de mi Beichazoi. He heard that his mother died from Beichazoi. Also the Kami de Rava, he came to Rava. Amalei, so Rava told him, we said Shmur Choyke einon hegas al yom echad bilvad. Shmur Choyke is only one day alone. It's interesting that Rava went lenient, like Rabbi Akiva, that Shmur Choyke is only one day before. But when it came to Yom Tiv, Rava was not lenient. You have to have 3 days before Yom Tiv. Rava Paskin early on the page that you have to have 3 days before Yom Tiv stops the Shiva. So he's sometimes strict and sometimes very lenient. So the Gemara asks you a question. I'll ask you a question that how could you Paskin like Rabbi Akiva that it's Shmur Choyke is not only one day. I will find you that you have to keep Shiva. B'chamisha misay mitzvah. When the B'medvar Chamisha misay mitzvah. The Brisa says, when do you say that you can get away with a one-day thing? If it's the other types of people you have to sit Shiva for. But if your father and your mother, you always have to sit Shiva Shloishim, even if it's a Shmura Chayka. So how did you paskin that they, for their father and their mother, that they sat only one day? Amalei. So this is what they answered. Yichidaihi. This was a yachid. Okay. I don't know who asked this question and who's answering over here because not clear who asked this question. But anyway, the answer was that this brisa is a one-off opinion. We don't hold like that. The Tanya, we'll see you. The Tanya we learned to the brisa. The father of Tzaddik died in Ginzak. And they told him after 3 years that he found out that his father died 3 years later. And they said, you should keep Shiva Ushloishim. Even there was 3 years later. Shel Rabbi Chia Bagoila, Yashiv Olav Shiva Shloishim. When he found out his son, when his son of Rabbi Chia died in Bagoila, he sat Shiva Shloishim. So we see from there that this is only Elisha ben Avu's opinion that even if after 3 years, if your father passes on, you still have to sit Shiva Shloishim. But we don't hold like that. It's a Yechidai, because it's only this Elisha ben Avu's opinion. So the Gemara asks the question. Now, when this you're telling me that Rabbi Chia, whose son died, Rabbi Chia had a son who died, and it was a Shmura Chayka, and he sat Shiva Ushloishim. So the Gemara asks, Aini, that's not so. For Rav, Bar Achuy Rabbi Chia, Ud Bar Achte Rabbi Chia. Rav was a nephew of Rabbi Chia through his mother's side and through his father's side, and there's a possibility that could happen. Rashi goes through the case actually when a half brother married a stepsister. So that's how Rav was born. You see Rashi, and basically Rav's uncle was Reb Chia. Kisalik lahasam, when Reb Chia went to visit Rav, so he wanted to know about Rav's father, who was his brother. Amalei Abakayim, is your father still alive? And he didn't want to tell him. We go to Chafam Beis. Amalei Ima Kayamis, my mother is alive. And you see, he didn't want to tell him right then and there. Amalei Ima Kayamis, is your mother alive? Amalei Abakayim, ask me about my father. So basically, he pushed him off. So he understood Reb Chia that his brother died, and this was a shmur chayka. So this Reb Chia did Amalei l'shamoi. So he told his attendant, "Chaloitzli minalei. I have to sit shiva. Take off my shoes, but I'm sitting shiva for a few minutes. Take my clothing and my bath equipment to the bathhouse, because I'm going to take a bath right after this. Right after a few minutes of Shiva, I'm going to take a bath. Shma Mino Tlas. So we see three halachas from this story. Shma Mino Oval also benil sasandal. Oval cannot wear shoes. Shma Mino, you hear from this Shmur Chaika in an Egas al Yom Echad. That a distant, you only have to keep Shiva for one day if it's something that happened, if it happened a long time ago. Ushma Mino, you hear from this Mikza Sayoim Kekulai, that he only stayed Shiva for a couple of hours and then he went to the bathhouse. So part of the day is as if you kept the whole day. So this ends the question. So Rab Chia, although it was a Shmuel Rechoike, he kept, when his brother passed away, he kept only one day. And then you're telling me that when his son died, Rabbi Chia Begoilet, when his son died, he sat Shiva Shloishim, even though when his son died, it was also a Shmura Chayka. So you have a contradiction of what Rabbi Chia did. So if you look closely, one is called Rab Achia with an Aleph, and one is called Rab Chia. So that's Gemara's Tara. It's Rab Achia Lechud, Rab Achia Lechud. They're two different people. One is Chia, and one is Rabbi Achia. New Gemara. Omar Rabbi Yossi bar Oven, Rabbi Yossi bar Oven said, Shama Shumar Kroiva Baregal. You hear a recent news on Yontiv, Ulamoitze Regal Nasas Rechaika. Very interesting case. The 29th day is on Yontiv. On the Matzah Yontiv, it's a 30-day when you're going to start shiving Shiva. So, but you heard it when it was within the Shloishim. It counts. And all you have to keep is one day of Shiva after Yom Tov. You don't have to keep 7 days. Same case, but a different venue. Shama Shmur Kroivel B'Shabbos. It was the 29th day of the event, of the passing, and you heard it on Shabbos. But Shabbos, you can't keep Shiva. Ulamatz Shabbos Nasr Chayka. But Matz Sunday, it's already the 30th day. So is it a Shmur Chayka or Shmur Kroiva? You only keep 1 day of Shiva. Now the question is, Korea or Eine Korea? The question is, okay, new question. On a Shmura Chayka, you're sitting Shiva, or whoever's sitting Shiva for a 1 day thing, does he do Kriya or does he not do Kriya? Rabmani says, Eine Korea. You don't have to do Kriya. You just sit on the floor, but you don't do Kriya. Rab Chanina Amar Korea, you do Kriya. You have to rip your clothing. Amalei Rabmani Rab Chanina. Ramani said to Rab Chanina, my halacha, what my opinion makes sense. Bishlam lididi, according to me, it makes sense. We say einoi kaireya. You don't rip. Hainu loika avelis shiva, because you don't have shiva. So when you don't rip unless you're doing a 7-day avelis. Elidi didach dama kareya. You who say you rip kriya below shiva miika. Is it possible to rip without 7? The idea of ripping is the whole idea is to show that things are ripped for 7 days, and not a 1-day thing. 1 day it's not nikkur, I guess, the kriya on a 1-day thing. Maybe you just ripped your clothing, but if you have wearing the same thing for 7 days, then people can see that the rip is for avelus. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? You don't rip even if it's a 1-day avelus? V'loi, v'tanya, we learned in a brisa, isi avua de Rabzera, isi, the father of Rabzera, v'amir la achua de Rabzera, kamei de Rabzera. The brother of Rabzera said this following statement in front of Rabzera. Mi she'ein lo ela cholak likroya. Let's say a guy is without a shirt and he's sitting Shiva. He has no shirt whatsoever. While he's sitting Shiva, he got a shirt. Korea, he rips it. As long as he got it in middle of the Shiva. La'acha Shiva, but after the Shiva, if it's already got up from Shiva, and then he found somebody donated a shirt to him, or it came back, Eina Korea doesn't do Kriya because he's not in the Shiva. Ani Rab Zeir Basrei, Rab Zeir said, I'm going to give you a caveat. Mitzvah. No matter how much time, even if it's after the Shiva, a person didn't have a shirt. He was sitting Shiva for his father and mother. And then by the 10th day already, after he got up from Shiva, somebody gave him a shirt, he can rip on his father and mother. So we see that even though you're not going to sit Shiva, you do a Kriya, even though you're not sitting Shiva. So therefore, so Rab Chanina is saying, what are you telling me, Rabbani? You make more sense. I have a brisa or a story about Rab Zera, who gave the comment that even if you're not sitting shiva, but if it's your father and mother, you could rip shiva, you could rip your clothing. So the Gemara says, no, that means that if what he's trying to say is you don't have to rip for your father and mother. If you want to rip for your father and mother, it's not called Bal Tashchis, because for your honor of your father and mother, you show you want to do something. For another mace, it would be Bal Tashchis, destroying a shirt if you rip. For your father and mother, you're not ripping because of Midin Kriya that you have to rip, but if you want to rip, it's for your honor and for your father and mother, you're permitted to do so. So that from that point, it's not a good proof that you can do a rip without a shiva. Probably over here, we're going to paskin that if you're sitting shiva if you're sitting avelus one day, ain't a kareya. Taner Rabbanan. Now the Gemara, we're going to end off over here discussing who do you sit shiva for. So Taner Rabbanan Brisa taught Kol Amar Parshas Kahanan Shekoyim Mitam Lehem. A kohen is not allowed to go to a levaya and bury somebody if it's not a mace mitzvah, except the shiva kroivim. So anybody, a kohen is permitted to defile himself. Oval Masabalaim. Those are the people that an oval sits shiva for. The Elohein, Ishtoi, Oviv, Imai, Echav, Vachoisoi, Benoi, Ubitoi. Wife, son, father, mother, brother, sister who's not married, son and daughter. Haisifu Aleihem, Chacham added a few more things that you sit shiva for. Achiv, your brother, Vachoisoi, your brother from your mother's side. All right, and which is not written in the Chumash, but your sister who never got married, who's not married, but it's your mother, you share a common mother, and your married sister, whether it's from your father and your mother, even if they're married, you sit shiva for your sister, even if you share just one parent. Now, the Brisa says, "Ukashem sem ablim aleim." Now, this is a big chiddush. Kashem shem ablim aleim kach misabel ashnim shalahem. That means the secondaries, just like you do avelus on them, so also you have to misabel on the secondary for them. For example, as Rashi explains, if a father is sitting shiva for his father, right? So let's say a person's father is sitting shiva, then the son has to sit shiva for his father. But not only for his father, let's say his sister is sitting shiva. So then anybody who you have avelus for, if your sister would have died, you would have to sit avelus for. So if your sister is sitting shiva, let's say she lost her son, you would also have to sit shiva. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. The secondaries, if it's somebody that you would sit shiva for, had they died, so if they're sitting shiva, you have to sit shiva as well. Divri Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, this is more common. Eina misabel ala ben benayv ala vi aviv. You're only misabel, the son of your son, your grandson, and your grandfather. So that's what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said. The Chachamim says, Kol shemisabel, all of misabel imoy. Whoever you have a velus with, you have to misabel when they're saying shiva. Chachamim hainu Tanakama. Isn't the Chachamim saying the same thing as Tanakama? Anybody who would sit shiva for, if they're sitting shiva, you also have to sit shiva. Isn't that the same thing of the Tanakama? Ike banayo imoy babayis. If you're in the same house with them, that's when you have to keep shiva. Chachamim say only if you're in the same house while that person is sitting shiva, you also have to sit shiva. But if you're not in the same house, you don't have to keep shiva. Tanakama is very strict. They said if it's you always have to sit shiva. If they're sitting shiva, you're sitting shiva as well. This comes up. I mean, you're probably familiar with this. If a person's father or mother is sitting shiva, it's almost like you have to keep a certain halachas that you're not allowed to attend weddings during that time because your parents are sitting shiva as well. And the Gemara is going to talk about a wife now sitting shiva. Does the husband have to sit shiva as well? Rav said to Chia, his son, right? Rav has son is called Chia. Even though he had an uncle Chia, he had a son also Chia. Rav Huna said to Rav, his son, but when you get married, ba'apa, in front of her, when your wife is sitting shiva, you also have to be an avelus. If your wife is sitting avelus, you have to avelus. Below apa, if your wife is not in front of your wife, you don't have to keep avelus. Or we don't do this today when a wife is sitting shiva because mistama, your wife would be meichel you that you don't have to sit avelis. And the same thing, opposite true. If the husband is sitting shiva, the wife is not noyig avelis because the husband probably is meichel it. Mar ukva, one more piece. Mar ukva shachav le bar chamua. His brother-in-law died. Mar ukva's brother-in-law died. Sava lemesiv Allah shiva shloishim. He wanted to sit shiva and shloishim because if his brother-in-law died, that means his wife's brother died. His wife is going to sit shiva. He also wants to sit shiva. Mar ukva. All Rav Huna lagabe ashkeche. Rav Huna came to him and found him. Amalei to Denisa boys the mechel. Do you like avelis food? You don't have to sit shiva. Lo amru ela lekvayit ishtoi. They didn't say lo amru lekvayit ishtoi for your wife you have to sit shiva. When your wife is sitting shiva for her father, your father-in-law or mother-in-law, then you have to sit shiva along with your wife. But if your wife is sitting shiva just for a brother, you don't have to sit shiva for your wife. If your wife is sitting shiva, the Tanya we learned in the Brisa, if your father-in-law or mother-in-law passed on, you can't force your wife to wear makeup and mascara. Ella, just the opposite. You should be in Avelis also. When her father-in-law or mother-in-law dies, she can't put on makeup. She turns over a bed. Her husband's sitting shiva, she also is sitting shiva. That's one brisa. V'tanya idich, and one brisa says, they said the opposite, that when you're sitting shiva, your wife is not supposed to sit shiva. She should pour you the cup and she should make your bed and wash your hands and face. So you have kashin adar, you have a difficulty between these two brises. This brise says each spouse sits shiva when one spouse is sitting shiva, the other spouse is sitting shiva. And this brise says no. If a spouse is sitting shiva, the other spouse can carry on normally. So how do you resolve that? One brise is talking about when the father of mother-in-law passes on, then they both have to sit shiva. Both spouses should shiva. With other kroivim, a brother-in-law that passes on, then only that spouse sits shiva. The other spouse does not sit shiva. They didn't say that you have to sit shiva for your honor of your wife. If she's sitting shiva, you have to sit shiva. Only your father-in-law and mother-in-law, that's it. Okay, so that's it. But again, we just said this, it's not so noyeg bizman hazeh because probably one spouse is moichel the other spouse from sitting shiva. Okay. Very good.
Yes, good.
Okay. Gute Nacht, everybody.